Okay, so we're ready to go here. Welcome everybody to the Police Service Board meeting for December 21st. And I guess before we begin the public meeting, I'd like to remind everyone that even though the meeting is not being live streamed, it is being recorded and will be posted to the board's YouTube channel following the meeting. So, declarations, conflict, or pecuniary interest. Anybody on the board? I see none. The minutes of the previous meetings, I'd like to move in a block from 237 to 239. May I have a mover and seconder, please? Member Ganzel, Member Stewart. Any comments or questions in the minutes of the previous meetings? I see none. All those in favor? Carried. Reports from the board chairperson. So first off, I'm going to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody. If I don't get a chance to say it afterwards, and I guess last but not least, I say Go Bills. Am I allowed to say that? I said it anyways. And that I'll probably hide on Monday, but whatever the case may be. Okay, first off, the Kristen French Child Advocacy Center of Niagara. On December 1st, the Kristen French Child Advocacy Center in Niagara hosted its annual holiday appreciation event at the center to honor the organization's numerous donors, volunteers, board members, and partners. Can you hear me at the back? You can? Okay, thank you. Member Stewart attended the event on behalf of the board. Vaughn, do you have anything that you'd like to say? Sure.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, it's always been my pleasure to represent the board at this valuable partner that we have, because it, you know, as a former educator, you know, dealing with the repercussions of child abuse is very, very important, and this group does an excellent job of advocating for the child and taking care of the child in the whole process, and I'm really glad we're a partner of them, and I continue to support them, and I hope the board does the same.
Very good, thank you. Next, the Chiefs Christmas and Holiday Breakfast. On December 12th, the Niagara Regional Police Service hosted its annual Chiefs Christmas and Holiday Breakfast here in the community room. The event featured St. Francis High School Choir with catering services provided by Club Italia. The event was well attended by the board, service, community partners, and members of the public, all of who contributed to raise a total of $3,383 to help brighten the holiday season for 5 local families in need of community support. Chief, I apologize. Maybe this should have been something that you say, but I hope you'll expand on it when you talk. Thank you. The NRPS Recruit Graduation Ceremony. On December 19th, a couple days ago, the service hosted a swearing-in ceremony here in the community room at police headquarters for 4 new NRPS recruits and 1 currently serving officer who we hired from the Peel Police. I was in attendance at the event and had the privilege of meeting our new officers and the families. Next, the OAPSB OACP Zone 4 meeting. The Ontario Association of Police Services Boards and the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police will be holding their Zone 4 quarterly meeting on January 9th at 8 a.m. The meeting will be hosted by us and held here in our community room at police headquarters. All board members are welcomed and encouraged to attend the meeting. Then the Pro Action Cops and Kids Victim Services Niagara Chiefs Gala 2018. On January 19th, Chief, are you going to be talking about this? Okay. On January 19th, Pro Action Cops and Kids and Victim Services Niagara will host the annual Chiefs Gala at the Crown Plaza in Niagara Falls. Victim Services Niagara and Pro Action Cops and Kids work in partnership with Niagara Regional Police Service to provide vital community services that build a safer and stronger Niagara region. This event will provide an opportunity to celebrate and recognize the work of our local police officers, as well as raise much-needed funds to support the services provided by each of the organizations. Vice Chair Ganzel, Member Stewart, and I will be attending the event on behalf of the board. Our upcoming PSB meetings, the next PSB committee meeting is Thursday, January 11th at 8:30 here, and the next board meeting is Thursday, January 25th at 8:30 here as well. And that's it for those. Reports from the Chief of Police.
Through your chair, thank you very much. I'd just like to also reiterate to everyone of the board and all of the members in attendance, again, best wishes for a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays and all the best. I'm not going to say Go Bills. I was going to say all the best in 2018. Just with respect to the Christmas breakfast, I just want to thank all of our community partners that attended. It was very well attended, and as you had mentioned, Chair, we raised over $3,000, which will go to community cares, and as a result, we were able to sponsor 5 families in the Niagara region who who are in need, and we're certainly happy to be able to support the cause. And again, thanks to everybody that came and supported our breakfast. I just want to provide an update with regards to the records checks. I know it's been a subject of much discussion in the past. The current turnaround time for all records checks is currently 2 weeks or less, and Records has been sustaining this time frame for about a month now. 2 weeks or less is their target, and on a go-forward basis, the reduction is a result of the dedication and commitment of record staff and IT staff to improve the processes. I want to particularly thank Records Manager Gary Holden and Information Management Coordinator Lori Switzer for their efforts in finding those efficiencies to reduce the wait times. I'm extremely proud of both Gary and Lori and our entire record staff for their dedication in finding a solution that meets the needs of all of our community. I just want to make or draw attention to an upcoming event, the Constable Dale Racine Trivia Night. This is, I believe, the fifth event that, or fifth annual, which will take place on Friday, February the 2nd at Amici's Banquet Center in Thorold. As you know, all proceeds for this event will be donated to the Dale Racine Educational Bursary. As advertising for this event has started, this is a very well-supported event by our members, and Constable Larry Maney of our School Resource Officer Unit is the lead organizer for this year's event. Always a well-attended event, and it's a great cause. With regards to our marijuana grow operations, so far we have seized $18,403,000 in marijuana. We didn't have any seizures in the month of November. With respect to homicides, we have had 3 homicides to date in 2017. Comparatively, in 2016 we had 1, 2015 we had 6, and 2014 we had 3, and 2013 we had 6. So we'll hope that that trend continues for the remainder of the year. With respect to robberies, we've had, in the month of November, we had 6 robberies. 5 of those robberies have been cleared. 1 remains under investigation, so that represents an 83% clearance rate. In terms of traffic fatalities, during the month of November, we had 2 fatal collisions, and we didn't have any life-threatening motor vehicle collisions. So with regards to our statistics, as of October 31st, 2017, we have had 17 total fatal collisions. Comparatively, we had 20 in 2016. So that's after 3/4 of the year's reporting. And November, we did have a fatal collision that occurred on Bigger Road and Montrose Road in Niagara Falls. That occurred on November the 12th at about 2:15 a.m. We responded to a report of a single motor vehicle collision on Bigger Road west of Montrose Road in the city of Niagara Falls. Initial investigation revealed that a 2003 Chev Cavalier was being driven westbound on Bigger Road with 4 occupants. Driver lost control of the vehicle. It left the roadway and struck a number of smaller trees before the vehicle came to rest on its roof in the ditch on the north side of Bigger Road. The driver and 2 occupants suffered minor injuries, while a 20-year-old female passenger was pronounced dead at the scene. Uniform officers have arrested and charged the driver with impaired driving causing death, and that investigation remains under investigation by our reconstruction unit. At approximately 6:05 p.m. on Tuesday, November 21st, we responded to reports of a pedestrian being struck by a motor vehicle on Montrose Road near Kaler Road, Niagara Falls. Initial investigation revealed that there was a single motor vehicle collision where a vehicle left the QEW and ended up in on its driver's side in the east ditch of Montrose Road. Shortly after this collision, a vehicle that had been driven southbound on Montrose Road pulled over and stopped at the west shoulder. The passenger exited the vehicle to render assistance to the occupants of the vehicle that was in the ditch. At this time, the 48-year-old female passenger was crossing Montrose Road when she was struck by a northbound 2016 Nissan Murano that was being driven by a 59-year-old resident of Niagara Falls. The female pedestrian was taken by ambulance to a local hospital with life-threatening injuries. She was then transported to an out-of-town hospital where she would later succumb to her injuries. The female driver was from the first collision suffered minor injuries, and the 59-year-old male driver of the Nissan did not suffer any injuries in the collision. That's a real tragedy, that one. Well, they all are, but that one's particularly tragic. Just some newsworthy events. On Monday, November 20th, the Niagara Regional Police were conducting enforcement with the automated license plate recognition system in Niagara Falls. Received an alert from an expired plate. Further investigation revealed that the registered owner of the vehicle was wanted by Hamilton and Peel Police for several charges, including assault and uttering death threats. He was arrested and returned to Hamilton Police to answer to those charges. It just goes to show you the spin-off effects that can result from that automated license plate reader. On Tuesday, November 21st, at approximately 5 a.m., the 36-year-old male victim was approached by 3 males in the driveway on Division Street in Welland. A disturbance ensued, and the victim was struck by a golf club to the head by one of the assailants and a pipe by another male suspect. The males fled southbound down the driveway. After being alerted by the victim's girlfriend, emergency services were notified, and the victim was transported to Welland County Hospital for treatment. He received lacerations about his head area and a fractured cheekbone. We've arrested 3 males from Welland and charged them accordingly. On November 22nd, 2017, we made some arrests in regards to an incident in Fort Erie where several thefts from vehicles had occurred. As a result of that investigation, a 19-year-old male was arrested and charged with 2 counts of theft under $5,000 and 2 counts of unauthorized use of a credit card. Again, just a reminder to people that may be viewing, just to make sure they keep their, we've started a campaign, the Lock It or Lose It campaign, and that just reiterates that notion of making sure their vehicles are locked and making sure they're not a victim of a crime. A total of 28 charges have been laid against 3 males following an incident in Niagara Falls on Tuesday, November 21st. At 7:56 p.m., members of our service were called to the area of Garner Road and Lundy's Lane in the city of Niagara Falls after receiving several reports of a vehicle pursuing another vehicle while one of the occupants was firing what appeared to be a gun. Following an investigation, police located the vehicle and suspects at approximately 10:20 p.m. in Niagara Falls, and 3 males were arrested. Police seized an airsoft rifle that bore a strong resemblance to a real assault rifle and a prohibited knife. A quantity of Xanax and other prescription pills were also seized, as well as some currency. 2 16-year-old males and an 18-year-old male were arrested and charged. On November 25th at approximately 11:20 a.m., officers responded to the area of Pine Street and Albert Street West in Thorold. Officers were called by a local dentist office after a patient became agitated while receiving treatment. The patient fled the dental office on foot and made utterances of self-harm. The woman was pursued by dental staff fearing for her safety. Officers located the woman in the area of Pine Street and Albert Street. While they attempted to apprehend the woman for her own safety, a violent struggle ensued. The woman spat in the officer's face and in his eyes. The officers were eventually able to gain control of the woman, and she's been arrested and now faces charges of assault police. An update regarding a shooting incident on Monday, December the 4th. 26-year-old Joseph Douglas Minty of Niagara Falls attended police headquarters in Niagara Falls and surrendered himself to police. He's charged with a criminal charge of attempt murder and pointing a firearm, discharge of firearm, careless use of a firearm, possession of a restricted or prohibited weapon, possession of a prohibited or restricted ammunition, carry a concealed weapon, and possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. That stems from an incident that occurred back on November the 29th in Niagara Falls, if you recall, at Drummond and McLeod Road in the city, where officers, along with EMS, attended the parking lot of Whiskey Nick's Texas Bar and Grill on Drummond Road for reports of a shooting. Officers and paramedics arrived at the scene and found a 49-year-old male suffering from a gunshot wound. The male was then airlifted by Orange to an out-of-region hospital, and he suffered non-life-threatening injuries. On Tuesday, December the 5th, a Canada-wide parole warrant was issued for a 30-year-old St. Catharines male. Members of the ROPE squad, or the Repeat Offenders Parole Enforcement Squad, were actively attempting to locate the male. At approximately 4:30 p.m. on that date, Jonathan Whalen was arrested without incident. They located a quantity of crystal methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl powder on the male when he was arrested. In total, police seized a quantity of the estimated quantity of the drug seized was $26,000. And they also seized about $4,200 in cash and 2 prohibited weapons. A 37-year-old man is in custody following an assault in the city of Niagara Falls that sent a woman to hospital. The assault occurred on November the 19th. In Niagara Falls, uniform officers and EMS were called to the area of Post and Preakness Street at about 3:30 a.m. when they found a female who had been attacked and left with serious injuries. She was transported to the hospital for treatment for non-life-threatening injuries. Investigation identified a suspect that led to a Canada-wide warrant being issued for a 37-year-old male. He's been arrested in the city of St. Catharines on December the 7th, and he's been charged with aggravated assault, overcome resistance by choking, and robbery. Since January of 2017, members of the 1 and 3 District Street Crime Unit, along with our Guns, Gangs, and Grow Unit, have been conducting investigation into the drug sales within the city of St. Catharines. On Thursday, December 7th, the investigation resulted in charges against 2 St. Catharines residents. The investigation involved the mobile sales of cocaine throughout St. Catharines by 2 persons, as well as drug sales from their residence. We executed a search warrant at their residence and seized a quantity of powder cocaine and crack cocaine and an estimated street value of $5,000, and proceeds of crime totaling $3,500. A 34-year-old and a male and a 28-year-old female have been charged and with numerous drug and weapons-related offenses. On Tuesday, December the 12th, at approximately 2 p.m., a lone male entered the CIBC on Lundy's Lane in the city of Niagara Falls. The male, whose face was disguised, approached the teller and demanded cash. A weapon was not seen nor indicated. The male left the bank with an undisclosed quantity of cash. A swift police response resulted in the male being located and subsequently arrested a short distance from the financial institution. Both the money and the disguise were recovered, and a 29-year-old male has been arrested and charged with robbery. In the month of December, members of St. Catharines Street Crime became aware that a recently released and convicted drug trafficker was once again believed to be responsible for the sale of drugs throughout St. Catharines. We launched an investigation, and on December the 13th, made observations of this male along with another male who was currently on house arrest, driving him to a suspected drug deal. And at approximately 4:21 p.m., these males were stopped and arrested on Dominion Road in the city of Fort Erie. We seized a quantity of cocaine with an estimated value of $1,600 and $3,600 in cash. And both are charged accordingly. And in December, members of the Niagara Falls Street Crime conducted an investigation into a male trafficking drugs from a residence in Niagara Falls. On Wednesday, December 13th, we executed a search warrant at the residence and seized a quantity of cocaine, heroin, and crystal methamphetamine, as well as proceeds of drug sales valued at approximately $4,000. And a 28-year-old male has been arrested and charged with numerous drug and weapons-related offenses. And last but not least, on Sunday, December the 17th at approximately 5:37 a.m., a lone male entered the Avondale store on Welland Avenue in the city of St. Catharines. Male covered his face with a disguise and armed himself with a knife. Prior to approaching the store clerk and demanding money, the male received a small quantity of Canadian currency and then quickly fled the store. Our uniform officers and from one district quickly responded to the call. And our criminal investigation branch were notified of the incident. Canine officer, along with uniformed patrol officers, located the male hiding at a residence on St. Paul Street and arrested him for this incident. The knife used in the robbery, along with the stolen currency, was recovered by the police, and a 30-year-old male has been arrested and charged. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Anybody have any questions of the Chief? Member Barrick.
Thank you, Chair. Not a question, but a comment. I had the honor and pleasure of being the MC for the opening ceremony of the courthouse in Welland recently, and I was remiss in my commentary to thank the Chief of Police for being in attendance, so I want to thank him publicly now. I know you're very busy, Chief, and to see you continue to come out to those types of community events is greatly appreciated and duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a beautiful courthouse, and it'll serve the residents of Niagara well for many years to come. Thanks.
So I guess he owes you one. Any other questions of the Chief? Okay, I have three, if you don't mind. I'll start with the most pleasant one, the automated license plate checks. I've never had so many questions about how this goes down. I'm doing this mostly for the video watchers that so that they understand, again, that it's your birth date. It's not the month. If it says September on it, and my birthday's September 2nd, on September 3rd, I'm illegal. So I used to think it's a whole month. And I've seen this vehicle sitting at St. David's Hill and that, and my greatest concern when they took us for a tour in the parking lot of it was that we'd have officers doing a spin around for a simple VAL tag charge. So it makes me so proud when I hear about arrests made on criminal offenses and things like this, and I've had no complaints about it at all. I've heard nothing but good about this, and I know this was a grant from the province, correct me if I'm wrong on this, so I'm very pleased by this. If you wish to expand at all, please.
No, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, it's been very successful for us, and I think what's important to note is that it may catch the VAL tag, but what it's catching more often than not are the fact that we have suspended drivers, whether it's for impaired driving, whether it's for a variety of offenses. But we've been able to prevent drivers who are driving without insurance on the road. It's been very, very effective, and as well, we've been able to arrest several individuals that have warrants out for their arrest. And so it's not all about the traffic enforcement, although that is important, but it's arresting people and getting people that shouldn't be driving in the first place off the roads.
Thank you for that. The next is the records checks. Am I still to believe that if someone needs one right away, they can come to the desk here at headquarters in Niagara Falls and get it, as long as it's not a vulnerable sector check where they might have lived in others, as long as there's not any problems with where they lived in Edmonton at one time or things like this. But they can, if a university student needs it right away and made a mistake, they can come here and wait and get it done. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. There may be some extenuating circumstances as to why they may have to delay. They may have to be fingerprinted. There's because of their name or their date of birth may trigger something within the system. But by and large, if somebody requires it, we, for the most part, can do a lot of them on the spot.
And that's a good job, and I appreciate you telling Gary that too on behalf of us, and that because we had so many complaints before. It's nice for all the good news on this now. My last one is the fatalities. Over the years, we've had certain reasons for a number of fatalities in cars, in motor vehicle accidents. One would have been Niagara Lake. It always seemed to be down there one year with the lines and that. The next time it was out in the Pelham through the Grimsby corridor that we had to concentrate on. Is there anything we have to concentrate on this year, or is there any common denominator of the fatalities this year? It's good that they're down, but is there a certain thing here, or is it just even across the board?
There is no real specific pattern, but what I would say is that it's the fatal four, and that's what we've seen historically over the last time that Dr. Divers did our 15-year study. It's distracted driving, so that's texting and driving, email and driving, or even just talking on the phone. It's speed, it's impaired driving, and it's failure to wear seatbelts. In this day and age, people still fail to wear seatbelts. So in some cases, what would ordinarily be a relatively minor injuries, or perhaps in some cases no injuries at all, in some cases results in a fatality. So those fatal four are what we concentrate on, and we do our best to try and educate the public as well as through enforcement of those four issues.
Okay. So barring no other questions, thank you very much for that, Chief. I'm going to move into the presentation now by Public Health. This is a presentation on Niagara opioid usage and prevention, the issues and updates. I'm going to ask Dr. Andrea Feller to come, but I'm going to prelude this with a brief story on why this is coming for benefit, especially of members that aren't on regional council. This came, oh, please come to the podium, and I'll just take a minute here. This started in September. It didn't start then, but the first time it came to regional council was in September, and mothers of some kids that had passed because of opioid abuse or whatever case it is made a presentation to us. It tore at our hearts. We all were up in arms for action on this, and it caused us a great concern, and it hit the papers and that. And we've known this from when we hired Deputy Forty and others of the opioid abuse that was coming in from Vancouver, from drugs coming in from India and China. And then the perception by me and some of the mothers was that things were going slow on this, and we didn't understand why. Without going into the problems of it, I met with Dr. Feller, and I'm proud to say it, and the chief this week, and we went over some of the issues that I didn't know, and she's about to say it now. And so we decided that instead of having the mothers present, we have a couple mothers in the audience, to make a presentation first. We'd like to hear from Public Health first, and then possibly the police afterwards with comments, and then invite the two of the mothers up, or whoever would like to come up and make comments on that. So I cue you, Dr. Feller. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for having me, and thank you to Jennifer and Sandy for deferring a little bit. I promise I won't speak long. There's been many announcements recently, and as you've just heard, so I was asked to come to give a bit of an update, and I'm happy to do that. I want to be clear, I'm just a doctor, okay? So my expertise is in pediatrics and public health, which is preventive medicine. So when I'm speaking here, it's really doctors, EMS, paramedics, police, it's nurses, pharmacists, addictions workers, parents. We were talking this morning about how we feel like we work together now as well. And so I don't speak for them, I'm speaking on behalf of them. So what is action, to the chair's point? There's a lot of reports across all sectors trying to deal with what's being called a crisis within a crisis, so the opioid situation. And many thanks to police and the chief of police, we get similar reports from the police sector as well. And they all are very similar. They talk about the pillars, and the 4 pillars we generally speak to are prevention, treatment, enforcement, and harm reduction. And I pull out education separately. It runs through all of that. Anti-stigma runs through all of that. And I want to share that Niagara has organized for years around this, and I really, again, say that on behalf not of public health or anything we've done. It's what Niagara has done to really recognize that this was becoming a problem. And this was easily 5 years ago, that our police worked to lead the first drug take-back days in all of Canada. It's now spread across Canada. And this was, again, a recognition that we needed to work more closely together. In terms of collaboration, there's many levels to that. And what we kind of call the Holy Grail is when we come to the table, so folks like the Chief of Police, myself, addiction sector, we have Lisa Panetti here from CASIN, parents, we come to the table, we take our hats off and we take our covers off and put them beside us, and we work as if we all work for the same organization to try and solve problems. So this is not something that's just happened this year. This has been building in Niagara, and I'm really proud of that, and we all know we have way more to go. So the opioid network in Niagara is organized around those pillars. We also work hand in hand with the LHIN. Healthcare and addictions are really under the LHIN. And we know that through all of this, collaborative action is going to be stronger than anything. I mentioned anti-stigma runs through all of this. I will keep mentioning that because it's not written there. So prevention, when you think about prevention, these are just some of the things that would include. As an example, in terms of data runs through all of these pillars as well. One of the examples here is you might have heard of the Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey that just came out, that drug use is at the lowest point ever amongst our elementary and high school students. That's prevention. We also know from our data that the average age as of right now, so things can change, is about the age of 38 in terms of what we're seeing, that EMS is seeing, that the hospitals are seeing in terms of specifically opioids. So behind the scenes, when I talk about what is action, behind the scenes, Brock and others have been working really hard around education campaigns and information for their students. So that's just one example. Treatment, this is huge. We know that, as you've just heard from the chief of just the most recent report, in terms of what you're seeing on the streets, polysubstance is the reality. We've heard upwards of 12 different substances that are being found through urine testing across the country. So treatment is critical. The other thing I want to mention here is you cannot force people into treatment. I do not want to downplay at all the difficulty of addiction, the difficulty in that it doesn't discriminate for any of us. We've all seen pictures. We see pictures of people's children. They look just like our children. And you can't force the 80% or so, and that's an estimate. The United States estimate is 90% of folks that are suffering from addiction but are not interested in treatment. You can't force that. So in Niagara, we've got a wealth of probably underfunded, I'll look at Lisa, still, treatment centers, addictions treatment includes counseling, includes housing. I know Sandy once had talked to me about the RAC clinic. Here we have the RAM clinic at Niagara Health. And I will say that the LHIN has recently increased some funding. They've been able to increase some funding to that sector, and we are very grateful for that. They know as well as we do that we need way more. So even though, for example, CASIN's population, that they see about 3,000 clients per year, 15 to 20% of those are there for opioids. And the Segway Clinic and others, it's much more. Even though we're only getting a small percentage of folks who are ready to go into treatment, my understanding is we're still overwhelmed and we still can't meet the need and the demand. So I think that's very important to understand. In addition, in terms of treatment and the reports and our sector partners, as an example, we were talking with the police about the SMART model out of Surrey, and we know that, I think it was Chris Healy here, but it's always dangerous on tape to say people's names, but we know that the police were instrumental with Niagara Health and our partners to have a version of this really robust case management approach that exists here in Niagara. And then enforcement. I'm not pandering, you guys really are amazing. And we know you've heard about some seizures just now. We know there have been other recent seizures. We know that ultimately this situation is, I'll just say it's a bit of a perfect storm in terms of opioid prescribing, the changes over time, and people have capitalized on the tiny, the small size of fentanyl and carfentanil. And they've capitalized on the incredible potency of it, of the cheapness of it. So I do not envy our justice partners, the police, Ontario Provincial Police and Niagara Regional Police, in terms of trying to stem the tide of this. But we need this flow to stop. We absolutely need this flow to stop, because now we've got this substance that is so marketable, from what I understand, and so fatal. The other side of it that I want to comment on, and I hope this is okay, Chief McCullough, is that police have the unfortunate reality of being police. And I've spoken with Officer Cindy White over there about this, in terms of police also have the strong desire, as all of us do, to do harm reduction and to get out there and to start doing some of the upstream work. But you guys have the bulletproof vests and you've got the guns. And so that's the part of being at the table. I'm really, really impressed with how you folks have worked with our emergency medical services, who are working with the LIN and with other partners around mobile integrated health. And how do we capitalize on our collective desire to move this upstream and have the right people in the right way at the right time, so that we can utilize our capacity, utilize our strengths, and also be aware of how that's going to come across to the public. So kudos on that. And then the final pillar is harm reduction. So you've heard recent announcements in terms of the federal government making application processes faster. We're hearing some murmurings out of the province in terms of overdose prevention sites. So really removing red tape, and we are very hopeful that that also comes with funding. And my concern a bit is that we are starting to see some backlash around this. So all of us care a lot about this. We are very, very concerned. We are starting to see some reports of people starting to say, well, where are these sites going to be? And what's this going to look like? And what's this going to do? And I think that collectively, as we work together, that'll be very important as we move forward to ensure that we do get the harm reduction services in place in a way that will work for Niagara. The other thing I want to say about naloxone, the first thing here, is that, and I'll talk about it a little more, I'm almost done with a map that we have, is that we're starting to see some people refusing EMS transports. And I don't mean just in Niagara. There's a big report that just came out about that. So this really is a very tricky situation. So I mentioned the maps, and Mr. Chair, you had asked for these at Regional Council. This is just an example of the kind of thing we're working on. So behind the scenes, I showed data went through all of the pillars. This is a composite map. It's called a kernel density map, and it's basically a heat map to show over the first 11 months of the year. I apologize, it's a little hard to see, but there is yellow, a light yellow, across all of the region, really. And this is just naloxone, where we know that EMS was called and naloxone either had already been administered or EMS administered naloxone. And this kind of thing is vitally important. As we drill down with it with our partners, we validate it with the frontline workers, and then we assess it compared to a map like this, which shows all suspected opioid overdose calls. And you can see the yellow a bit better there, to assess where the gaps might be. And I'll just go back and forth. You know, right now, again, kudos, and I feel very uncomfortable saying kudos to anybody. This is not about us, but you know, to put out there that Positive Living Niagara, other partners, the pharmacies, really working around the clock to get naloxone out there, and you can see that those maps almost match. What we can see is that this goes across the entire region with the yellow, and that matches our data. A map is so much easier to see than us telling you, which we've been saying for a few months, this is all across Niagara. Yes, there's hot spots, of course, but this is all across Niagara. And when you think about our 1,200 square kilometers, or I might have that number slightly off, and you think about the magnitude of this, that's what we're working hard on. Okay, and I said I was going to mention naloxone, so I will go just briefly into that. So has everybody here heard of an automatic defibrillator, AED? Right, okay, thank you, yes. So raise of hands, has anybody seen one demonstrated in terms of the use? Good, if you haven't, please take CPR and learn. Has anybody used one? Live situation, okay? So those of you who raised your hands that you've used it, you don't usually have people running away, right? It's not usually you and one other person there, and you're using that AED to help save their life. In fact, what I've found in my situations is you have 10 or 12 people, and they kind of keep showing up, and I don't mean to make light of it, you're managing the crowd, in essence, as well as trying to help this person with their heart. Has anybody ever seen, putting my hand down, an AED used, you help defibrillate somebody and they get up and they run away and they refuse to go to the hospital? Or anybody there saying, you brought him back, okay, it's all done? No, right? Let me be clear. You give people naloxone. Remember I said 80 to 90% of them are not ready for treatment. You give them naloxone, it is not a panacea. It is not a silver bullet. It can help reverse the opioid respiratory suppression. The other thing that can help is breathing for them. So a lot of our services can do what's called airway management. The guys and girls out on the street that are with users or people suffering from addictions, they might not be able to do that. So give them the naloxone, that's gonna help. But I will tell you right now, they run away. They start to bring somebody back and they don't hang around, especially if they see uniforms, even if it's EMS. So I want to be very, very clear because I know there's been a lot of confusion about what naloxone is and what it is not. So our EMS, if you see on this map, we've got 571 calls. There's been 112 where naloxone's been used. I can guarantee we've just had Streetworks, not including pharmacies and everyone else. They've given out close to about 300 kits that have been used. They're being used and people are not calling EMS. If there's one message I can get out there, call EMS. We will help you over the phone. We will help you with breathing for the person. Do not use alone and call EMS because these are people that they're not all better. They need to go to the hospital or to some medical care. And the final map, I just wanted to show, just to really plant the seed. The color intensity you can see pretty much matches the other maps I've shown you. This is what we call a deprivation index map. And what this is showing, the most intense colors are those that are considered most deprived. The terminology is not great, but this is what we mean when we're talking about the social determinants of health. So those heat maps, they really match this. And that tells us that we have a lot of work to do and to continue doing around housing, around income, around poverty, around all those other things. So I hope I haven't taken too much of your time. This is the website, and this has the most up-to-date opioid data on it. And I'm happy to try and answer any of your questions. The final comment I want to make is I won't give ourselves kudos. We don't deserve that. We are going to do this. We're going to do our best, and I speak for all those organizations on behalf of them. I, as your associate medical officer, what's important to me is that my partners and the leads have their values in the right place, and they do. And that means everything to me. We have big town problems here in Niagara. We have big town problems, but we have small town advantages. So thank you to all the partners, and we won't stop doing the work. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Feller. I'm not going to have any questions now until after the Chief of Police talks, please. So if you want to have a seat right now, and then I'll probably call you back. I'm sorry? Okay, well, go ahead and ask if it's just about the presentation. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair, through you. Just with respect to the actual presentation, first of all, thanks for coming this morning, Dr. Feller.
Thank you,
always
Councilman.
appreciate hearing from you and the good work that you and your team do. I just had a quick question about the slide deck, which was very informative, and the maps are always great. But the maps, are they like raw numbers in terms of the densities? It's bigger in the population centers because there's a bigger population there. Do you have like per capita to show, for example, it's a big issue across all of Niagara, and yes, we can target where the population centers are, but if the per capita is a bigger problem elsewhere, like in some of the rural areas or even Port Colborne, which I represent as a regional councillor, can you speak to the per capita issues and where the problems are most stark?
Thank you. And excuse me, through the chair, I can speak to a piece of that. And please know that I'm not making light when I say you should be an epidemiologist. I don't have those maps with me, but you are exactly right. When we look across the province in terms of rural areas, sorry, I'm from Philly. I can't say that word. I don't know why. But in terms of the more country areas, the per capita is quite high. You are exactly right. So I don't have those maps now, and for any further data questions, Sinead McElhone, our chief epidemiologist, is here. But those are the kind of maps we're looking at, absolutely. And we can get that for you. These are things that we'll be doing over time through the network.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, if it's just on the presentation, go ahead and
Thank you. And again, thank you for your work and what you do. I mean, it was stated earlier, I just wanted to confirm with you that the working group actually started in June 2016 in assembling the necessary players to start this process. So, and you've been with it all that time, so thank you for that. And I know this afternoon we will be meeting with our federal partners to see what kind of assistance that they're going to be giving us. When you talk about, and you spoke just a little bit about the AEDs versus the naloxone, and you said people run away. I wasn't quite clear on what you meant by they run away. So could you just further expand on what you meant by that?
Yes, and I would say that our police services might be able to speak to that even more than myself. When somebody is aroused from their respiratory depression, they are still somewhat in the midst of that high. They are often very confused. They're under the influence, so to speak. This is a disease that affects the brain, and when you're using drugs, your brain is affected. So it is not the same as somebody who was doing work, climbing up a ladder, doing whatever, and suffers from a heart attack. They are going to be potentially confused, but they'll have a sense, okay, there's people here taking care of me. I'm surrounded by, I see an EMS uniform. I better sort of do what they're saying. Most people who are under the influence are going to come around, and if they see EMS uniforms, if they see police, if they see any of that, they're not going to have that mindset, Mr. Chair. They're going to be thinking, let me get out of here. They might be paranoid. And again, I don't want to speak outside my area of expertise. I'm not an addictions expert. But they are not going to be in that same mindset of, oh, please help me. They're going to be in a totally different mindset. And they might have no idea what's going on, but they can breathe now. The other piece of it, too, is you might have a room where there's paraphernalia scattered. You know there were 12 people there just minutes ago. They're not going to hang around either. This is a criminal situation still. So does that help answer your question?
Well, it really leads to my second question,
Right.
is the length of time that the antidote works. Mm-hmm. And I understand it to be a very short period of time. And so can you describe to me what happens after they run away?
Well, thank you. And first of all, I want to say, let's shy away from calling it an antidote. An antidote is something that you might give to somebody with a poisoning, and it could reverse it. So, but I say that for the benefit of, and it is something that it's a bit of a helper. So it can vary from seconds, because people might need more and more doses, even just to come up or come out of it, or it can stay on board for quite a while in terms of if that's all they needed to be able to breathe again. What we do when you call 911 is we talk about, is the person breathing, and please breathe for them if you're willing to do it. If it's one of our services, they will do an actual airway and make sure the person's breathing. But to your point, if the person has come around enough that they could breathe and get away, you're going to see plenty of those folks that get away, the opioid hasn't worn off, they succumb again and go into respiratory depression, and it could be fatal.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And if you want to have a seat right now, I'm going to ask the chief to comment, give some comments on it, and then I'll ask the ladies to come up. Thank you, Chief.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, and thanks to Dr. Feller. And as Dr. Feller had mentioned, this is a complex issue, and it will take a collaborative effort from a lot of various community partners to address and tackle this issue within our community. I'll speak about our efforts from an investigative perspective as well as an education perspective, because we've been really trying to address both of those issues. So between 2014 to 2016, the majority of the investigations that we undertook involved the diverting of prescription opioids, the oxycodones, the hydromorphones, the fentanyl patches, in addition to heroin. In 2016, things changed for us, and we saw it marked the influx of the powder opioids, the fentanyls, and the analogs. And although fentanyl patches continue to be trafficked, fentanyl powder became much more prevalent and began taking over the opioid market here in Niagara and really all across the globe. This is, when we talk about this issue, it is certainly not something that's unique to Niagara. It is going on globally. Overdoses began climbing as the use of fentanyl powder was becoming the prominent substance with fentanyl users. Naloxone was being distributed through pharmacies to at-risk individuals in 2016. The overdose deaths that we experienced would have been much higher had it not been for those kits being provided. In 2017, to address the challenges that we were experiencing with the opioid prevalence, what was previously our PAVIS unit became the Opioid Enforcement and Education Unit. Unit consists of 3 members currently, and the unit works with our morality unit, our guns, gangs, and grow units, and our street crime units. The opioid unit has had a member attached to the Niagara Overdose Prevention and Communication Network since 2015 when it was created. And the network is now putting together a steering committee together to get to the prevention and communication plans associated with this work that needs to be done. The Opioid Enforcement and Education Unit performs many functions, and it has assisted with the following: preparing our service and our membership to be informed regarding the safe handling of powder opioids. We've developed training videos and bulletins to protect our own members from harm's way from being exposed to these powders. We've set up a powder drug processing room, which is equipped with the most up-to-date equipment, and we are currently in the process of completing 2 additional powder drug processing rooms in our 1 district in St. Catharines and our 3-district facility in Welland. In 2017, we began equipping and training our officers with naloxone kits. The specialty units that are exposed because of the types of investigations that they do were the first that we have equipped with those kits. The next stage is reviewing the feasibility of whether or not we should be equipping our frontline officers with naloxone kits. There's issues associated with that as well with regards to our special investigation unit in the province. To date, if our officers were deploying a naloxone kit and the person died as a result of that, we would be having to notify the SIU of that circumstance, and in all likelihood they would invoke and there would be an investigation surrounding that incident. So in the early part of next year, I plan to draft a letter and send that to the Special Investigation Unit as part of our feasibility review to see whether or not they have any intention of, in that same circumstance where we're in all essence trying to save a life. We're not trying to do anything other than, if use Dr. Feller's analogy, whether it be performing CPR or same type of a scenario. So we're wanting to save a life, but we also don't want to protect our officers from potentially being investigated by the SIU as a result of their actions. The Opioid Enforcement and Education Unit has also provided drug lectures to numerous students, again, focusing on the prevention aspect, and we believe that that's a very good target audience for us if we can prevent or if we can catch the young kids early and prevent them from getting into the use of these drugs. So they've provided education seminars at public school grades, at Brock University, and at Niagara College. They've also provided lectures to a number of community partners as well. I've got a list of different agencies, and I can provide that if necessary. And they've also undertaken a number of investigations and I spoke to a lot of those in my opening remarks today. They're complex cases, they're time-consuming, and quite frankly, we're just scratching the surface. That's the reality of what we're faced with. We have to date, since April 1st, we've undertaken 71 total investigations where charges have been laid. 92 individuals have been charged, and that accounts for 158 criminal code charges, as well as 220 CDSA charges, Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. In addition, we've had 50 seizures of opioids from individuals that were not charged. We've seen a number of overdose incidents in Niagara where it has resulted, or where they've been associated to those deaths. We've had 34 incidents where fentanyl has been associated to in deaths of individuals. Now, that may vary from the coroner's data, where the coroner relies on the fact that the fentanyl was the cause of death. We're attributing 34 deaths where fentanyl has been associated to the death, not necessarily the cause of the death. 2 are associated to carfentanil, 4 have been associated to hydromorphone, 7 to methadone, 1 to codeine, and 6 to morphine. Where we had in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, where we had a lot more people using oxycodone. We haven't had any deaths associated with oxycodone so far this year. So suffice to say, there's a lot more work to be done. We look forward to working with our various community partners to address this issue. And again, if anyone has information with regards to somebody that may be selling carfentanil or fentanyl or any other drugs for that matter, tips can be called in through Crime Stoppers, and we're willing to work on any tips that people may have. As I mentioned, there's a lot of work to be done, and we continue to work very aggressively with our various law enforcement partners, including the CISO, which is the Criminal Intelligence Services of Ontario, to address the trafficking of fentanyl and carfentanil, and we will continue to do so in 2018, and we'll work aggressively to try and tackle this issue.
Thank you for that, Chief. So now I'm going to ask Sandy Tantardini or Jennifer Johnstone to come up if you wish. But, and there are 2 of the mothers that have lost children in the past in this. Sandy and Jennifer, remember you're talking to me here, please. If you have questions, I'm not going to ask for a dialogue going back and forth. I'm just going to ask that Dr. Feller or the Chief just writes down the question, then I'll ask you to come up and respond when they're done. And then any board member, when this is all done, can ask questions of anybody that they wish on this. One thing I'm going to say is, and that I missed that Dr. Feller mentioned to me, is the public health is the backbone of support for this. They're not the lead, but they're the backbone. They help everything there. I hope I worded that right. And the point of this being here is the awareness and dialogue. And that's the big thing. We don't want it to go on the back burner. I think you ladies must agree with me on that. I'm really torn at having you here, and the reason I say that is the emotion it brings. I've talked to you about this, and I get it, and you want to solve it. So we have to be constructive, and we have to move on with solving it. We can't go to the past, but I watch my comments here. On the videos, you'll see pictures of some of the kids that have lost their lives, and these are Niagara area kids in the past, so that'll strike on us. And certainly our concern is lives, health. It's a drain on funding, it's a police time, it's a time of everybody here. We all know it's a problem. So ladies, please, thank you.
Usually I'm really too loud, so. The videos that you're seeing right now are all children of moms that are part of our group. So these are all children that we have intimate knowledge of. And I do want to say I recognize that us being here is a gift. You know, there's no obligation to have us here, but we really do appreciate that someone wants to hear us talk. So I took a lot of notes, basically just to, I don't want to get emotional. I am nervous, so, but I lost my son Scott, who's actually up on the screen.
You take your time, just the people at home can't hear unless you talk towards that microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I lost my son Scott on August 27th, 2016. He died of a fentanyl overdose. He was released from he had been to several treatments. To make a long story short, did a 3-month dual diagnosis program out west, and relapsed 24 hours later and was gone. So since that time, and I knew Scott was actively using, there's a lot of the people that you'll see on this screen, their parents had no idea. They had no clue that their kids were using. So they had the blow of losing their children. They also had the blow of not even knowing half of these words, let alone what it meant to them. So it's right across the board. So you've got people who are a little more hip and, you know, a little more active in social media and finding out, educating themselves. And then you've got, you know, people who, because I dealt with Scott for a number of years, you know, did I hit something? Sorry. You know, I was well aware of this. Looking back, I made a lot of mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes. If I could do it over now, I would absolutely be looking at medically assisted treatments. It's high on our list of agenda. We started a group, NAMES, as you can see, and our mandate is to incorporate some sort of medically assisted treatments with something like a 12-step program, but non-judgmental, it's a difficult situation if you've never been to, say, a Nar-Anon meeting or things like that. You know, the mandate is to walk away from your kids, tough love. We just didn't buy that. I didn't buy that. So I kind of did what I did, and I supported my son. And I never turned him away. And it's probably allowed me to go on. Because I think if I had turned my back on him, thrown him out, like a lot of people have, I wouldn't be here talking today. So that's okay. So that's kind of Scott's story. That was just about 16 months ago. So this is my second Christmas without him, which really sucks. The seconds seem to be harder. I think we were talking about this. The first ones are kind of where you're numb, and you know, like I barely remember last Christmas. Now the reality is seeping in for me, and I want to do something. I want to tell my story, not because it's a sad story, not because it's a unique story, just because people like us need to start talking about it so that other people can understand. If you've never dealt with an addict, you know, an active addict or an addict in recovery, you have no idea what they go through. Like, until you've detoxed somebody or been part of their road to recovery or not recovery, it really is, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing, like, what we are asking them to do and how we are asking them to do it. So we do have some questions, but I'll just let Jennifer give you a bit of an idea, too, and say her piece. Go ahead.
Okay, so I lost my son, Jonathan. He actually died in Toronto alone on a sidewalk. And I want to make a disclaimer before I tell you about my experience with Toronto police. I'm not criticizing police, but it was handled badly. And I'd like to think Niagara Regional is head and shoulders above that. He had a health card on him, and they put him in the morgue as a John Doe. So 2 days later, when we reported him missing, you know, they informed us that they had him there, and I didn't see the sense in that. I thought, why, you know, if it had been a car accident, or then, you know, they probably would have let us know that he was. I mean, he had government issue IDs, so I thought that was insensitive, and I think it's due to stigma. And I'm hoping things are better now, that police realize that they're loved and missed, and their life meant something, was valuable. So that's my story, and I'll let Sandy speak now. She's so much better at it.
No, I'm not.
Bob, I didn't cry.
Hey, you can do what you wish. You're in control. I just don't want to put you through this. So please give us your questions, and then we'll get responses, or...
Okay. So I just took some notes about what people were talking about because, like I say, we're new to this. We're learning. We do a lot of reaching out to, because we attend Moss Park. We have contacts in the community outreach programs. So whenever I hear something, I kind of go, oh, and I'm learning every single day. Like every single day, something I thought I knew was right. You know, I'll reach out to people who are active in that environment, and I'll say, this is what I hear, what do you see? Because what we say and what we see, what people actually see, tend to be two different things. Not unusual at all for most situations. So, like Andrea's mandate, the prevention, treatment, enforcement, and harm reduction, education. The addiction treatment I see is tied into how we treat overdose victims in the initial contact. So I know one of the concerns that the police have is, and this to me is, I just found this one out. This to me is mind-blowing, that if an officer attends an overdose and administers naloxone, that they're then subject to investigation under the SIU. That's disgusting. That is absolutely disgusting. And I know that, I believe it's out in BC where they've made an exemption for that. And I'm wondering how we can get that to happen here. Like, is there a policy? Is that something to be explored?
The chief has already addressed that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I must have missed it.
No, he's going to send a letter or
Okay.
draft a letter in January.
Okay.
This was all in the Globe Mail yesterday, confirming exactly what you said.
Oh, perfect, okay.
So,
Oh, I missed that
yeah.
article, but
I'm just giving you a quick
no,
answer.
No, and
so, yeah,
that's
thank
like you say, I learn something new every day. There's so much information out there that we read, so that's wonderful. I appreciate that, because one of the things that that I think needs to happen with police, and this is what we're getting from, like, I know people out west, and I know people like from Moss Park and stuff. So in the question of whether or not police should be using naloxone kits, one of the big questions that I've had from every single agency that I've reached out to is, will police undergo sensitivity training? The reason I ask this is because I work in the Hamilton courts, so I work directly with police and special constables and stuff like that. So I've seen some amazing work being done with people with mental health. I see a lot of drug sick people every day. And our CSOs, our officers are amazing with them. They really and truly are amazing with them. Having said that, Hamilton police have refused to carry naloxone. It was offered to them. And that may be as simple as the SIU reason. But what we're wondering is if for example, Niagara Regional Police said, yes, we want to carry naloxone. Will that come with, for lack of a better term, sensitivity training? Because the number one thing that we hear, the feedback that we get from people who are working at safe injection sites or unsanctioned safe injection sites is that when police show up, they show up as police officers. And I think police officers are trained for certain situations. They need to contain a situation. You know, they're looking to protect people that they think may be in danger. So if you have an overdose victim and there's 6 people around and, you know, one's a firefighter and one's a, you know, perhaps an EMS worker, they move in as a police officer. Okay, and they're looking to contain. And from what I was hearing, this is causing a lot of problems because they're not acting as frontline workers. And I think if police are going to carry naloxone and administer it, they have to take off that police hat and they now have to put on a different hat. So they now have to become a frontline worker. And with that becomes a whole different way of treating someone. Like, you know, we're not, police officers don't, in that situation, worry so much about containment. They worry more about
Okay,
reassuring the person.
we understand what you mean by that, and
Okay.
I'm really
And I mean no
timid
offense.
in
I
that.
hope I'm not-
You're not causing any
Okay.
offense, it's just I want to get all your questions. So if
Okay,
you have other
okay.
ones, the chief will respond.
Okay.
So please give me your
Okay.
other questions too.
Okay, so then,
And this is
so that's the big
worst
thing.
I've ever had of trying to interrupt somebody,
I'm
but,
sorry,
you know,
I'm
no,
sorry.
please. I'm torn here, thank you.
Okay, so that's fine. So that's our big thing, is police sensitivity training. The other thing is, I know in certain jurisdictions, police officers don't show up for overdoses at all. So I think if police, they don't show up in, I wrote it down. I did write it down, I'll find it. So they don't attend in Sault Ste. Marie or Kingston, except where they're called by EMS because a person refuses care. They don't show up in Vancouver, and in London, they only show up as EMS support. So those are 4 that I could find where police officers don't show up. Let me see, what's relevant here? And the big question is, like, are police in support of that? So you can maybe address that for me as well. At Moss Park, there's been over 120 reversals, and there's been no incidents of violence. And I truly believe it has a lot to do with how it's handled by frontline workers, because they're so experienced, right? So there's reassurance and that sort of thing. And then I think the big question, too, is we all have stigma. Like, all of us have stigma. You know, if you had asked me some of these questions 2 years ago, I would have a very different answer for you. I completely admit I was guilty of stigma. I thought, my son, he needs to suck it up. Like, seriously, what's wrong with you? You know, and I think at our base, we all have that stigma, and that's something we really need to look at ourselves and examine ourselves, which will go a long way to answering those questions and researching and talking to people. You know, I'm looking at the map. So I know, like, because we're on the Safe Injection Site committee, and we're sort of addressing, okay, where would we put safe injection sites? There's 3 obvious places, right? There's Welland, St. Catharines, and Niagara Falls, because those are all the hot spots, right? And I think that, you know, it's the hot spots that you need to start with, because it spreads out from there. And I think that's what's happening, is you have these main places where things are starting, and it'll branch out to, you know, the smaller communities like Thorold and, you know, other places.
Okay, so I'll ask Dr. Feller to
Yeah.
come back
Okay.
in time
Okay.
to address that one.
Let's see.
There's no rush on you
Oh.
to ask all your questions. You know you have my email address. I'll get answers
I
for you
know,
on
I
everything.
know.
But this is for the public too. I
Okay.
want to hear them.
Okay.
So,
So I talking about, and maybe that's something Dr. Feller can talk about again. So the diversion has the diversion of opioids, like what they've done with the opioids, has actually accelerated this. Obviously, that's a pretty well-known thing, has exacerbated this issue, because people who have been on pain medications for years for chronic pain because they were told it was safe have now found themselves cut off. And this is where you're now seeing people like our kids, instead of what you normally would have seen 20 years ago, where it's homeless people and, you know, and like nobody's born homeless. Nobody, you know, at 15, my son didn't say to me, I want to be a drug addict when I grow up. I want to die young. Nobody says that. You know, it's all circumstance. It's genetics, which we don't take enough into account. It's mental health issues, and it's circumstance. So I did mention the BC. I actually have a question, because this is sort of a pet peeve of mine. And I know that there were you mentioned 220 charges of simple possession. I saw something that indicated that when I say simple possession, I'm referring to marijuana, for example. Because it's a controversial position, because you're police, you wear a police hat, you have to enforce the law as it stands. But why in the interim are we not offering some sort of a diversion program, knowing it's going to be legal in, you know, 6 months, 8 months, whatever the time frame is? Because in my view, we're still criminalizing people, and we're making it that much more difficult for them to recover from a criminal record. Like, even if somebody gets a pardon, they cross the states doesn't recognize a pardon. You have a drug conviction, no matter what, you're going to have a hard time getting into the States. So we're penalizing people in ways we don't even realize with simple drug possessions. And I'm wondering if there's been programs where they divert them, you know, to different programs, you know, and it's, you know, a simple diversion program. You know, just as easy to prosecute them as it is to, because most of them plead guilty. You know, it's just as easy to divert them as it is to prosecute them. And I'm wondering if that's something that's ever been discussed as part of a, you know, like sort of a policy that's not.
I'm sorry, I've got your question on that. Please, I have to move along. Thank you.
Yes, I'll do that. Okay, so our last question, and then we'll finish, I'm sorry, is...
Don't ever be sorry, okay?
I'm sorry. I can't help it, I'm Canadian.
Okay.
So the last thing that's come up, and it's come up among private citizens, is the idea of an unsanctioned safe injection site. Now, I don't know if anyone here has ever been to Moss Park, the unsanctioned safe injection site in Toronto. Jennifer and I have gone. We've brought supplies and stuff like that. It is an incredible place. It is incredible. The community there is amazing. It's very supportive. It's nothing like what people think. You know, I would encourage everybody to just visit there before you make judgments about it. So I'm wondering what the feeling is, because I know what the legal stance would have to be on unsanctioned safe injection sites, but I also know Toronto had that as well, and Moss Park is still operating. And I'm wondering if there's been any discussion about that, because I know rumors are sort of flying around about the possibility of that happening, and what the position would be on that, what the real position would be on that. So that's pretty much what we wanted to touch on, was just the sensitivity training, the idea of, you know, the safe injection sites, and just, you know, asking these questions. So.
Okay, and you know that if you have any other questions down the way, you can email me or anyone here, and we'll get answers. But my point of you being here is so the public could see answers to this. Okay. Now, a few other items that have come out before I go to the chief first, and then I go to Dr. Feller for answers. I'll be asking you to sit down. Is that Mayor Walter Sendzik made it public through the Ministry of Health that Niagara Falls was the #1 opioid overdose per capita city in the province, country? Province. I'll say province.
Yeah, I think it's
and St. Catharines was #5, which causes us concern. And we wanted that map up there because that woke us all up as regional councillors on this.
Absolutely.
the awareness and dialogue is what we need on this. And so if you don't mind, I thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
I wonder if I should have questions of these two ladies now from the board, if you have any. If not, I'll have the chief answer. Opinions? Chief and Dr. Feller, I'll have you answer their questions first, if you don't mind. Ladies, if you don't mind, go ahead and have a seat.
Thank you.
Hit that button, will you, please, so the red light comes off. And Chief, if you don't mind going first with any answers you can give. I'm not putting pressure on you, Chief. If you have to get back to us with answers, that's fine.
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much for the questions, and I'll do my best to address, I think, most of the questions, and I may turn to Deputy Flynn, who's had some additional experience with the issues, particularly around the police not showing up to overdose calls. I'll refer to Deputy Flynn for that. With respect to frontline officers responding with naloxone and whether they're responding as frontline workers or versus police officers.
Excuse me 1 second, Chief. Can you hear back there? You can. I see you straining, so, okay, thank you.
Okay. So, I mean, that's a difficult one in that we're sworn as police officers, and we're required to adhere to all of the laws of the province. But that said, our officers undergo sensitivity training through our annual requalification training that we do. We have seen a significant increase in the number of calls related to mental health and addictions. I think our officers do a fantastic job of showing empathy and compassion. We understand that nobody, particularly as it relates to addictions, sets out a course in their life that they're going to become a drug addict. It's not what somebody sets their goals to become, and we recognize that addictions have a terrible grip on people's lives. I know the stats are quite alarming in terms of the number of times it takes for somebody to successfully get through a detox program. It's certainly not a one and done type of situation. So we recognize that. Can we be better at sensitivity and being empathetic and compassionate to people? We can always be better, and we can always reinforce that with our officers in our training scenarios. With regards to diversion programs, I'm not aware of any specific diversion programs that we have available to us in Ontario with regards to drug charges and being diverted to a program. But I think, and Dr. Feller can speak to this, perhaps top up what I'm going to say, and I think the more critical piece to this is that we have on-demand treatment available. Because you can have a diversion program and somebody may go through the program, but if they're not truly willing and committed to going through a detoxification and a rehab program, they're not going to be successful in it. So I think, but when somebody makes that commitment that they are ready to go through it, that's where there has to be that on-demand treatment readily available at the drop of a hat. And currently, there's additional funding, I think it's fair to say, that needs to be put in place, whether it's through the federal government or through the provincial government, to allow for expanded use of that on-demand treatment. And with respect to the police not showing up to overdose calls, I'm going to refer to Deputy Flynn.
Mr. Chair, just to top up very quickly on Chief McCullough's comments on the first question and Sandy's comment, if I can. Sandy mentioned the number 220 CDSA charges, and she referred to simple possession. And sorry, Sandy, we didn't go into great depth on those, but that's not always the case. 220 CDSA charges. I think if we broke them down, what you'd largely find is that's in relation to possession for the purpose of trafficking, import, export, those kind of charges. So another number right in behind that was 50 seizures of opioids, which were not charge related. So we certainly understand that there's that there's opportunities for officers to have latitude in relation to the decision to advance charges. But she makes a great point on that, simply charging people with possession all the time in relation to different drugs, we've heard it again and again, we're not going to arrest our way out of some of those issues. With respect to the idea or the thought, and I think Sandy just posed it more as a, not a question to us of, are we going to do that, but have we considered that? In Vancouver, and just based on some of the information that I've had, the officers in the East Hastings area stopped responding as immediate responders to drug overdose callers, recognizing, like Dr. Fellers mentioned, like Sandy and Jennifer have mentioned, that there's a stigma attached, and that people think when the police are called on 911 that they're going to be in trouble. So somebody overdoses in an apartment, and what started to happen was people would be dragged out of that apartment and left in a laneway rather than have police attend and find somebody's drugs in there. So that was really an effort, recognizing that EMS is so close in that downtown core area. It's certainly something that as a police agency we need to consider, but we also need to consider we have a very rural population in some instances, or sometimes our fire and EMS are overburdened by other calls. So I think the other side of that coin is, what if we had the opportunity to save somebody or help save somebody and we couldn't get there in time, or we weren't responding because it was a 911 overdose call. So thanks for that point, though. It was a really good point. And then the other question, or the other part of that in relation to police taking off their police hats, and we totally understand that. I mean, we have to be sensitive to the issues that people are dealing with in their lives, but the other piece about police coming to these calls is that what if there's an opportunity during that investigation into how somebody overdosed, that we actually identify people who are, maybe drug dealers who are providing people with lethal doses of drugs. What if we have that opportunity during that we find that this person who's actually dealing to those victims in these cases, that we can stop them before it happens to somebody else. And I think that's something as a police agency we need to consider as well. Thank you.
So again, Sandy and I'd like to keep going up. Okay, Sandy and Jennifer, if you want further responses on any of these questions, you can email us, and I'll make sure it goes through to the chief, and then he'll have an officer respond to you, or whatever the case may be. And also, I'm going to just go one step further. I gave Member Caslin, being chair of the region, a copy of the article from the Globe and Mail from yesterday. He said he had a meeting with the feds today. I know this is provincial, the funding, but I could be wrong on this. So I'd appreciate you looking into it, Member Caslin. Dr. Feller, if you can respond to some of the questions, press the button if you don't mind. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for, again, every time I hear you speak, I learn something more. So thank you so much, Sandy and Jennifer. So in terms of, I'll speak just most specifically to the supervised consumption sites or facilities, and also follow up a bit, or top up, as the chief said, around right time, right place care. So when we, as the support, think about these facilities or services, our general role is to provide data, provide information, which the police also have, around what other jurisdictions have found with their sites, and help the group, and you're on the group as you mentioned, work through what would be the right approach for Niagara, and what does that look like. So one of our frameworks that we think about is need, impact, and capacity. So when you talk about need and impact, you're thinking more in the one-on-one patient scenario in terms of what we know from these various facilities, and they have different models, is that the folks that go to them, there's indication that it's probably saving their life, at least for that day, at least for 1 or 2 or 3 people. In terms of the population, that's quite different. And so what we have most recently, for example, out of Vancouver, and I don't know if we've talked about this before, is that and they've had Insight and the other facilities there for probably some of the longest time in North America. What they have found is that about 4% of the using population actually is able to go to any one site. They've found that in general, if it's further than 500 meters away from where somebody is using, they will not go there. So I'm not going to pull up the map again because I think we're kind of done in terms of the computer, but if you remember the maps, those heat maps, you're absolutely right in terms of the location, and we've spoken with the city of St. Catharines, I know the chief of police has, in terms of the epicenter, if you think of it that way, of where that area is. But, and Sinead will correct me if I'm wrong, it's actually quite a big area that those maps cover, and that most intense color is way more than 500 meters wide. So I think that's important to consider. And to one of the members' points around more country areas, how do we get to those places? So there's definitely considerations. In addition, so getting into capacity, if we're looking at permanent sites, what we would say is they need to have a full suite of healthcare services. So absolutely, to the chief's point, you want right time, right place. Not to downplay this, it's very similar to what we talk about with tobacco. Don't quit quitting. It's not going to happen the first time for a lot of people, like you mentioned. Don't quit quitting, and we want to do everything we can to have somebody right there, 3 a.m., ready when you're ready. The logistics of that and the capacity piece, I turn to the community, the group that you're on, I turn to the LIN in terms of those pieces to figure out what's going to work for Niagara in terms of the entire population. The last thing I wanted to mention is that the province has mentioned these overdose prevention sites. Right now, it's conjecture, but our sense is that it might be an approach they want to take. We understand we'll learn more January 1st. To what you speak to around the unsanctioned sites. So there's a lot of considerations, there's mobile considerations, but I really think that what we need from the community, we being all of us, is an ability to look at all those factors, look at the money, look at if there is any funding, and look at trying to make sure that the best is in place as possible, as is realistic and feasible across all of Niagara. Does that answer your questions? Yeah. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Go through me if you don't mind. I'm sorry if there's more questions.
No, I apologize,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Now
like you said, it's hard not to get caught up.
Oh, I get it.
Yes.
So now, if there's more questions, obviously I have emails. I can be, and we will get answers on this. Now I'm going to open up to the board to ask questions, beginning with Member Stewart first on this. So, and if you have questions of any of the ladies or the chief or Dr. Feller, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. This is really comment leading to question for both Dr. Feller and the chief. Personally, I'm one that realizes that this will never ever go away. It's how we're going to manage the situation, which leads me to be a big supporter of the harm reduction model versus other types of models. Now, just recently, I saw an interview on, I think, CBC television. I believe it was the ambassador from Portugal. And in Portugal, in the recent years, they have decriminalized all drugs. So being a drug addict or a user is no longer a crime. However, trafficking drugs is a criminal offense. And which leads me, I guess, with Regional Chair Caslin, a meeting with the feds. I wonder if overarching in the big picture of the country, we start to look at that. And our federal government has indicated in the last year or so with healthcare funding that they really believe in the whole mental health aspect of things. They've earmarked money for mental health. And I can think of very few other things that are more related to mental health than addiction. I mean, they coexist in so many scenarios. So when I look at this type of model that Portugal has gone, it's probably the ultimate in safe injection sites, you might say. In other words, Dr. Feller, you mentioned about the people that run away, that if somebody is overdosing, everybody around them leaves because the police are going to come and we're going to get arrested. And then there's that whole fear factor, which is probably accentuated by the fact that they're in the process of using drugs. And I don't know, I empathize, being a police board member for 8 years, that the police just can't disregard the law. But I think police and public health and other government officials need to advocate pretty strongly for the idea of this harm reduction. To put it in another context where we've already proceeded, I remember seeing a lot of presentations on human trafficking. And we're at a point in this country where being in prostitution is not illegal, but it is illegal to human traffic. And I think as a country, we're getting a lot better at getting at the human trafficking by decriminalizing the victims in that scenario. Here, I see a tremendous parallel to this. So I guess that's a lot of statement and not much question. But I just wonder, from your perspective and from the chief's perspective, what can happen and what can we do, if you believe what I'm saying, to move towards this type of model where we can be more helpful to those in need rather than, you know, making criminals out of them or making them feel like they're criminals, even if police have the discretion in their charging and whatever it is, it's still an awkward thing. And then with that, what can we do to educate the public who really think that if you're making drug use not criminal, that all of a sudden everybody's going to run out and become a drug user. I think that's a total fallacy. I mean, I have a background in education, is where I came from, and I believe wholeheartedly that's a fallacy. But the public, a lot of the public doesn't see it that way, and I don't know if that fits into your education model that you mentioned earlier or not. So I'll stop now and hopefully get the comment from you two on those issues.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the member, thank you for that. And I will say that Officer Marco and I have had that conversation before about decriminalization. I think that, you know, as time goes on, and very much this afternoon, I'm very lucky to be part of that meeting with our MP to get a sense of where they're at on this exact issue. I will note that, for example, cannabis, it's not necessarily being just decriminalized, it's also being legalized. So there's a lot more complexity to it. And we certainly see the reports from other countries in terms of decriminalization and the excellent impact in terms of anti-stigma. To your question about, I think if I hear you correctly, you're asking about changing the culture. I think that role modeling is critical, and I think what you've done just here is critical. I think that to change a culture, there's the destigmatization that I spoke of, and the network is going to be doing a lot on that, as well as the ongoing work around destigmatization around mental health. We're seeing good success with that. And I'll just say that in terms of people's perceptions. There's courses out there in Niagara. Many community partners do a course called Mental Health First Aid. And that can go a long way, and that's available to anybody. There's speakers bureaus that I believe CMHA or CAMH? CMHA and Pathstone have. And so you can ask them to have a speaker with lived experience to come and talk in terms of the destigmatization. Yes, that word. So I can say, in terms of agreeing with you, the stigma piece needs to go. From what I understand, this used to be the case with cancer, right? You couldn't say that word. We can make inroads. This is sort of the cancer of our time.
So what you've shown me is people from Philly have problems with words.
Absolutely.
Member Ganzel. Chief, did you have any comments to that at all?
I'll just reiterate what Dr. Feller had said, and you know, I think the reality is that we're in a new normal, and we have to look at if we keep doing the same things, it's not working. So I think we have to, all options should be on the table. whether that includes decriminalizing and destigmatizing. We couldn't agree more with regards to the whole education piece and having positive role models in people's lives. We've seen success, and through our school resource officers, we've seen that success in getting out and having those positive role models to allow young people who are impressionable to make proper and better life choices. And we believe that through that education process, that can include not going down a path of using drugs, and hopefully we'll see some positive results from that.
Follow-up?
Just one quick follow-up to the chief. I just wondered if the the Association of Police Chiefs or whatever it is has any committee working on this type of thing, and whether or not, I don't mean, legalizing the drugs so that you can go down and get your opioids at the local LCBO. That's not what I was referring to. I think they are illegal unless they're prescribed. But I just wonder whether the chiefs have a group that may be working on this and perhaps researching in more depth than I know about Portugal. But the statistics this guy quoted from Portugal was like outstanding in the harm reduction and the number of opioid and fentanyl deaths. Like they were like in half. So I think as a society, it's worth exploring. If somebody's doing something, we might learn from it.
The OACP, Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, has a committee. We're just researching what the name of it is. It has addictions in the name. I know that. I just can't think of the full name. But they are looking at this issue. It's an issue that's, as I mentioned earlier, it's not unique to Ontario, and I know the International Association of Chiefs of Police, it's a very topical issue. I just came from Philly, as a matter of fact, for the conference that was held in October, and fentanyl was a very topical issue that was discussed there.
Okay, Member Genzel.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. A question to Dr. Feller on this one. There's been the Port Colborne hub or situation table model, which was probably started, I think, 3 years ago. Is the health community a participant in that hub model in Port Colborne?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I might not be exactly sure of what that hub is, and that's something we could check into offline. Again, what I can say about the health community is that the mandate that has come out in terms of public health working with the LHIN has really helped that we're hand in hand with them on this. So in terms of the health side of it, the health care, the addiction sector side, that would be with the LHIN. So
it was more set up to basically, as somebody became known to police, rather than dealing with it as a, quote, police matter.
Oh, okay.
The name came to a table, and the table was represented by various people that could provide alternative services, health being one of them.
Okay, so sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, that might be what I was referring to before. It's kind of the Smart Surrey model that we've talked about. And I do recollect that was out of Port Colborne. Again, I'm speaking for other community members. That's why I apologize. I'm not an expert on this. My understanding is Niagara Health is very much at that table.
Any other questions from the board? Oh, Chief, do you have a comment on that one? Sorry.
I just wanted to clarify that the hub in Port Colborne is not fully operational at this point. We're still waiting on some training for the community partners that are going to be part of the hub. That's scheduled to take place in early January, and Niagara Health, Public Health, sorry, is a partner at that hub.
No other questions? Okay, I want to thank everybody for here. Sandy and Jennifer, I appreciate you coming. I appreciate everybody on this because we wanted to have dialogue. We wanted to have awareness. I know you didn't get all your answers. I can tell by the reaction on your face. So I know I'm going to be getting an email, and you'd better send me the email and that because you know, I'm pretty blunt, and you've said that before, but that's the way we have to be. We put it on the agenda. We're trying to cause awareness. So I'm hoping that somebody, so please email me. I'll send your email to the proper authorities. If you have their addresses, send it to them. I don't need to be involved unless you want me to be. And I know the motion here, and I'm going to be looking for a mover and seconder, but I hope somebody will make a motion. After I discussed it with the chief said that he'd get back to us, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, on a report on how this is going with the opioids and that from a police standpoint in 3 to 6 months. Correct me if I'm wrong, of the conversation we had, there could be a report back to us.
Yeah, that's not a problem, Chair. We can provide an update as to our work with the committee, and I've received the name of the committee from the OACP is the Substance Abuse Committee.
Okay, so is it fair to have a motion made by someone here to receive this and a report back from the police service on a report on the opioid abuse, or whatever word you want, Deb will word it, in 3 months?
Sure.
4 months? You tell me, please. Because I don't want to hurry it with 3 months. I want to get the right answers rather than the rushed answers.
Yeah, I mean, we can report on a 3-month basis to let you know what's being done.
So may I get a mover, Member Castlin, to that motion, a seconder, please? Member Ganzel? All those any discussion on the motion? Member Castlin?
I just want to add, I'll be sure to report back on anything that the federal government is willing to do to participate in the solution to the problem.
Yeah, the timing of your meeting is great. So all those in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you very much. And thank you, ladies. Thank you, ladies from Public Health, for showing up, and anyone else that's out there from this. So next on the agenda is item number 240, an unfinished business. Can I have mover and seconder? That's the audited financial statements. A mover and seconder to put this on the floor, please. Member Castlin, Member Ganzel. First person to comment on this, Member Barrick. Member Barrick, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be clear, anyone that's watching, it's with respect to the 2017 preparation of the financial statements. And I did get the minutes from the committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, and have had some correspondence with regional staff, which is before us today as a memorandum. So I guess there's a couple of things. One is in the police report, the police staff report on the audit. There's an option 2, which is the one that I would, well, I would like to move it. I'm not sure what the motion is currently on the floor, because the report is asking for direction. So if I can help provide some of that direction for
Yeah, that was the point of this, Member Barrick. We deferred it for your comments on this, being Chair of Finance at the region, as well as up to date on this. So thank you. Okay,
great. So if I may move option 2. And I don't know, is there anyone from the auditors here today? No.
Through Mr. Chair, no, that's not the case today.
Okay, thanks. So there's option 2 in the staff report from the police services. In the memorandum by Jason Burgess from the region that we also have in front of us today, on the second page, the last bullet point, he references the board could consider the following additional options, and one of them is the NRPS board could consider requesting inclusion in the internal audit group's work plan and initiatives. I'd like to do that. Most governing bodies have the auditors report directly to the governing body. And I know we have a memorandum as well from Mr. McCaig. We don't have an audit committee, is that correct, through you, Chair, to perhaps Ms. Reed?
We have a finance committee, that's it.
A finance committee. So are we able to request that our auditors report to our finance committee meeting at the appropriate time? And if we proceed with option 2, I mean, my personal disappointment, and I know possibly others, but I'm going to speak for just myself. The last time, the last audit was a single page. And, you know, it's a $140 million plus budget, and a single page just wasn't, in my view, transparent by any means. Option 2 will further elaborate and provide a little more clarity in terms of how the public's money is being spent, while at the same time respecting confidentiality of specific operational services. But also the option provided by Mr. Burgess here is that dialogue between the internal auditor and this board, which we do have an obligation, whether it's clearly articulated and stated in the Act, or whether there's an absence in the Act, that there's a notion that we are responsible for that information, how the audit is conducted, and we're responsible to ask questions as part of our role here on the finances of the organization, as is any governing body with whatever body that may be. So I'll move that option 2, also adding that we request, I believe it's KPMG here. There are auditors. Deloitte, my apologies, Deloitte. Deloitte, so that we request Deloitte report to the Police Services Subcommittee, the Finance Committee. I would personally like to see, in fact, a meeting in January where they can discuss their work plan in advance of them actually conducting their work, and then coming back after they are done their work to report to the Finance Committee. So
we'll take your motion. We'll ask Deb for direction to get them here in January. Can I have a seconder to that motion? Member Casson, any questions or comments on that? Member Stewart.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I'm in support of as much information as the board can get. I concur with Member Barrick that we are the oversight body for this and therefore need more information in our role to fulfill our roles, in my opinion. A number of years ago, we used to have more information, and then it changed. We got less and less, and it seemed like all we were getting was an audit of the special fund presented to us. I think if it's the intent of the mover, I'd also like to make sure that all police-related costs are included in information for us, because right now we have a very complex structure, and that is that we have operational budgets we approve, capital requests we approve, but then there's a whole lot of, well, it used to be called chargebacks, and then it went to cost allocation model and whatever it is, where a lot of police expenses never ever go through this board, and they're decided at the regional level. We have revenues that come in, for example, the court security and prisoner transport monies that come in as support for the operations budget, but are ending up used in other budgets. So it gets pretty complicated, and I think as a board, having all of that clarified and having all the information on the table for us allows us to do our job better. So anything along that line, and I think option 2 was the one that I also supported when I read it, and I think I concur with more information. Go through finance, and even well, of course, finance meetings are public as well. So I think that just helps us do our job better.
Okay, Chief, do you have any comments on this at all, or? I just want to hear if you have any comments on this motion at all, or no? Go ahead, Laura.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to give you a couple of comments about the second point in the memo that came from the region. The NRPS board could consider requesting inclusion in the internal audit group's work plan and initiatives. I spoke to the region staff about it because I wanted to understand what that meant. And the region has an internal audit department. It's not part of the external auditors of Deloitte. It's actually an internal audit department. They report directly to the audit committee of the region, and their mandate is basically to audit processes and operations of the region. My understanding from from my conversation with the region is that the ABCs are not included in that. And what that second point is referring to is the recommendation by the board if they want to be included in that work plan. They do publish their 2018 work plan, and in it they state exactly the areas that they would be looking at to conduct an audit. So currently, the ABCs are not included in that, and that is the point of that second recommendation from region staff. And that was brought forward so that the board has ensures that they're doing that quality assurance testing that they want. So I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that point to you.
Member Barrett.
Great, thanks for providing that clarity, appreciate it. So the motion that I put forward is, with all due respect to the bullet point by Acting Commissioner Burgess, is for our auditors, Deloitte, to actually work with the Finance Committee here. So although it did trigger the involvement of this board with our external auditors, by no means am I suggesting that we, I mean, the 2018 internal audit work plan of the region is complete and approved, I believe. So I hope, thanks for your clarity. I hope I also provided clarity.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you. Now we go to consent agendas. I'd like to move them in block, if I could, from items 241 to item 248. Can I have a mover and seconder for that, please? And then we'll invite questions. Member Stewart, a seconder, please. I'm looking to my right. Member Barrick, who wants to start off with any questions on these? Is there any questions on these? Member Ganzel.
Just through you, Chair, just a point of clarification on the 241 report, the special fund. I just wanted to, in my own mind, I can't totally recall. The monies provided to the East Village Improvement Task Force was $2,500. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you. That clarifies it.
Any other questions on item 241? Do you have any other questions? Go ahead.
This one is on 241. Sorry, 244. It's on page number 6. It makes reference almost at the end there. It's called Project and Justice for All. Hotel Registration of Guests Act in Ontario. I'll have to admit I will not know every single act in Ontario, nor should I, or required to, but I have never heard of this one before. What is the background on that? Are we going to hotels and looking at their registration of everyone who registered there that night and running names?
I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with that act, so I'll endeavor to get some additional information for you on that.
Okay, thank you.
We'll send it out through an email if that works.
Anyone else have any other questions on item 244? Member Ganzel, any further?
How far are you going again?
All the way to 248.
No, my only comment, sorry, on 248, my only comment on this one was I've heard that both these programs, the COAST and the MCERT, are doing excellent work. And again, I would continue our services involvement and keeping that those two projects or two programs alive and running within the service. I think there's big payoffs for that. Thank you.
Any other comments on item 248? Are you finished with yours? Any other comments on consent agenda items? Okay, Chief, I have one comment on item 243, the quarterly report on overtime activities. It looks like what you're doing, I'm hoping that's the reason it is working. It's down, and that, so from what I've seen, so good job. As soon as it goes up, I'll revoke that, but you know, you were addressing it, you were having town meetings, you were trying to get a buy-in from the service and that, and I hope that we're working as a team on this, so I appreciate seeing a downward trend on it, so thank you. Anyone else have any other comments on any of the consent agenda items? All those in favor of receiving them? Carried. Now to item 249 in new business, the Durham Police Service Board bill. Mover and seconder for this one, please. Member Caslin, over to my left, I'm looking. Member Ganzel. So I'll talk about this first. I received a letter from Roger Anderson, is that the name? The chair of the Durham Police Services Board, who sent it to the ministry saying that there's no grandfather. Well, he didn't say there's no grandfathering. He said under the new Police Act that's being proposed, anyone that served on a police service is not eligible to be on the board. So he said he was out because he was a police officer, I guess, 30 years ago, which would mean I'm out because 37 years ago I was a police officer, which means Ken's out because 17 years ago he was on the police service. So we thought there was grandfathering on it. We weren't really concerned in that, but so I took it to send a letter to Roger Anderson in support of his personally, saying this was coming to our board to discuss, but just to let him know that 2 of us are off this board as soon as that goes into play, which might not be for years. But regardless, we thought the wisdom might not be there because I understand if a police officer comes on the board 1 year later, there might be a bit of a problem. But 37 years, I have a bit of a problem with this. So that was it right there. Any other comments? Member Ganzel.
I do have a comment, and I appreciate Member Stewart alerting me to this the other day. Under the proposed legislation in this, it's Section 9, subsections 4 and 5, and it reads, do not prevent a person who was a member of a police service board immediately before the subsections came into force from serving the remainder of their term. So if you had been appointed, in my case, 3 years,
So there is a grandfather.
until the end of my term. So if the situation had been, and I know there's no automatic for any of them, but let's say there was a situation where I'd only done my first 2 years and I was eligible for a possible 3-year renewal, that 3-year renewal would not take place. So you would complete your term and that would be the end of it.
Okay, well, that in itself is wrong if you were just here in your first term, because I think you're valuable to our board. But then hopefully this causes them to address that up there and think about it, because that's the reason it's out there. So any other comments on this item? Member Stewart.
It's just a question, Chair, and I know this will tie with another item from OAPSB shortly, but I'm just kind of curious about looking at the list of people that your letter went to. I'm just curious as to if I wish to write a letter to the following people expressing my personal views on things. I'm just curious, should I be using board letterhead to do it, or should I just do it on my own? I just didn't know what our procedure would be on that. Well, there's a letter that's copied to the ministers and all of that. So if I expressing my personal views on something, should I be using board letterhead because I'm a board member?
No, not personal views. But I sent it as chair of the Police Service Board.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And if Ken hadn't been involved in this, I probably wouldn't have sent it at all. But with Ken being involved, with the 2 of us being involved, I wanted to get this going. And I said to Deb, I'd like to get this letter out before they all sit down for the Christmas break.
I'm just looking for direction.
Any personal
opinions.
Thank you. As chair, I believe I'm allowed to, but certainly I have to care that it comes from the will of the board in some aspects on it, but any board members to send personal comments out in letterhead, I don't believe is allowed. Okay, all those in favor of receiving this report? Carried. Item number 250, the Ontario Police Video Training Allowance. I would like to move item 250 and 251 and block together, please. Can I have a mover and seconder for those two? Mover and second, Member Caslin, a seconder. Member Ganzel. So these are both Ontario Police Video Training Allowance Membership Agreement and the Reserve Fund Transfer Request. Any comments or questions on this item? Member Ganzel. I expected that.
I would be amiss, Chair, if not, again, verbalizing my support to the OPVTA and the work they've done, and through the manager there, Jamie Saunders, who I believe is in the back there, and all the work that he has done over the years, having some peripheral involvement in this 35 years ago. When we started with black and white slides and a Kodak carousel for training, we've come a long way. But again, I can't speak highly enough of the services that we provide to the community, policing community across Ontario, and I know from the membership list, our material goes across this country. I see names in Alberta, I see names in the Atlantic provinces again, so it falls very shows very well on what we're doing as a service and through the video unit that we have within this service. So again, I can't speak highly enough of us and support the ongoing efforts here. Thank you.
Chief.
Thank you for that, Member Gansel. I can't echo those comments enough. We are very, very fortunate in Niagara to have our video unit that provides us with such top quality material. I mentioned at the graduation the other night that our recruits receive the best training in the country, and I truly believe that. And a lot of that can be attributed to the great work that the OPVTA does, and more importantly through our own training unit that provides that training to the OPVTA.
Okay, any other comments or questions on these two items? All those in favor? Carried. There's two special fund requests. If we can move item 252 and 253 together, please. Can I have a mover and seconder for those two? Member Stewart, a seconder, please, to my right. Member Barrick. Comments or questions on the International Police Hockey Tournament request, as well as the Venture Scouting Company? No questions? All those in favor? Carried. Item number 254, the amendment to the proposed meeting schedule. Mover and seconder, please, for that. Member Caslin, Member Gansel, any comments or questions on that? Member Gansel?
Now, just to clarify, then, the meeting in December is a
committee meeting.
It was marked as a full board meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's a full board meeting.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
So we're bypassing a committee meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, we're making that a full board meeting. Okay. All those in favor? Carried. Now to go to the supplemental agenda, please. Item number 256, the request for financial contribution for legal analysis. This is of the Safer Ontario Act, and that is self-explanatory. All those a mover and seconder on this item. Member Stewart, Member Caslin. Any comments or questions on this item? All those in favor? Carried. Item 257, the approval of the Budget Review Committee recommendations, NRPS proposed operating budget. A mover and seconder on this item. Member Stewart, Member Caslin, comments or questions on this? All those in favor? Carried. Number 258, notice of council approval of NRPS user fees. To receive this report, mover and seconder on this, please. Member Stewart, Member Caslin, comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. 259, annual report, equal opportunity discrimination and workplace harassment prevention. This report be received. Mover and seconder on this item, please. Member Caslin, Member Gansel. Comments on this item? All those in favor? Carried. 260, the Police Services Board amending the license bylaw. The board approved the bylaw to amend licensing and that the chair be authorized to execute the required documentation. Mover and seconder on this. Member Stewart, Member Gansel. Comments on this? Member Stewart.
Thank you. And this maybe is not totally related, but it is in the sense. Just saw recently in Toronto, Lyft is now operating there, and they were interviewing some Uber drivers who now have two phones and are Lyft drivers and Uber drivers, and whatever call comes in first. So just as a point, I'm just wondering if it could be passed on to our licensing, probably the next licensing committee meeting we have. It'd be nice to know how that is going to affect everything we've been trying to do to license these things. It's a new territory, but just because it was licensing, I thought maybe just as a sense of a heads up that we should probably look at that.
So that's a direction, Deb, on that? Okay. Any other comments on this? All those in favor? Carried. Next is, am I getting ahead of myself? No, the in-camera reports? Okay, item C1 to C281, 282, 283, and 284. I'd like to move in block if I can. They're all in-camera reports to go public. Can I have a mover and seconder? Member Stewart. A seconder, please. Member Barrick. Comments or questions on any of these reports, and all of them will be going public after this. None? All those in favor? Carried. Is there any new business in public? Chief, do you have anything else?
No, Chair, I do not. Thanks.
We're done. Thank you very much. We'll be going to in camera next. Thank you very much.